You're good to go? All right, thanks for the patience and welcome to the first Fruita Area Chamber of Commerce Ballot Issues Forum for 2020. Can everybody hear me okay? This forum is brought to you by your Fruita Area Chamber of Commerce and its Government Affairs Committee. I'm Kurt Anderson and I'll be your host for tonight. I am the chair for the Fruita Government Affairs Committee and also CEO of Spartan Drill Tools. The Government Affairs Committee meets every other Monday at 4 p.m. at the Fruita Area Chamber of Commerce office. And if you're interested in joining or learning more, please contact the Fruita Chamber. All right. Means how we're already 10 minutes ahead, or 10 minutes behind. I'm going to cut some of my stuff and we'll just jump into this. So we have 3 speakers tonight that we've invited that are going to talk to us about 3 of the 11 key ballot issues that are on your Colorado ballot. This evening we're joined by Diane Schwenke, who is president of the Grand Junction Area Chamber of Commerce, and she's going to be talking about Proposition 118, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. And then joining us via Zoom, we have Commissioner Rose Pugliese, who's going to talk to us about Proposition 113, which is Colorado joining the National Popular Vote. And then our final speaker tonight will be Mesa County Assessor Ken Brownlee, who's going to help us better understand Amendment B, the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. So each speaker is going to have about 3 minutes to introduce themselves and kind of go through what the bill is, and then 10 minutes for their presentation, and then we'll leave time at the end for some extra questions if there are any. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Diane.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me. And Kayla, I made your life miserable because I have a PowerPoint. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you tonight about probably one of 2 major issues impacting the business community that we as chambers across the state have concerns about. I'm going to talk about Proposition 118, but we're very much interested as well in the Gallagher Amendment proposal. So, to start off with, there have been a lot of editorials about this. It is a proposed family medical leave bill that would create a roughly $1.3 billion bureaucracy, create a new department at the state of over 200 people to administer a family medical leave bill that would allow employees to take up to 16 weeks of paid leave. And overall, I want to start off by saying that in our chamber, and I'm sure it's the same in the Fruita Chamber, we are very supportive of leave and family medical leave for employees across this valley. That is not the issue. That's not why we have a problem with Proposition 118. And it could probably be summed up the best by an opening editorial that appeared on Saturday in the Boulder Camera newspaper. And I'm going to quote, the author says, "The family and medical leave insurance proposition is arguably the most misleading, poorly written ballot issue ever. Great concept, horrible proposition. You should not only vote no on Proposition 118, you should also cross off the yes option and write no in that space also." And I'm going to tell you why. So as you can see, I have 2 slides up here that show the business organizations across the state that have banded together to oppose this amendment. Or this proposition. It is a statutory proposition, so the legislature can make changes to it. But you will see the Grand Junction chambers down there, the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce. We have a huge coalition, so Kayla, if you'll just go to the next one as well. Most of the business organizations across the state have a real issue with this. So let me give you just a real snapshot of what the initiative is. So the next one here, as I mentioned, it is a ballot issue that proposes to fund a Cadillac, frankly, version of family medical leave, and it would be paid for through what we call a tax. The proponents call it premium, but the reality is you're going to have to pay it regardless. 0.9% of payroll initially that would be split between the employer and the employee in most cases. So that's okay, yeah, I can talk off the top. And so the issue here is multifaceted. But the reality is that it would be a state-run program similar to like unemployment. So as an employee, you should be concerned because, frankly, a lot of employers offer leave now, maybe not 12 or 16 weeks, but you go to your employer if you're going to have a baby and you say, I'm going to need to take so much time off, I'd like to use whatever leave I have. And you still stay on the payroll, you get paid 100% of your wages while you're on that leave. What this proposes is that you would apply, like you would for employment benefits, to a state bureaucracy in order to take your leave. And you would only get 80% of your salary. And you are now paying for this benefit, which traditionally employers across Colorado have simply offered to their employees. So the proposition from an employee standpoint, it actually, if you look at the money that it's going to cost you, it's on a sliding scale again because it's a percentage of your wages, but it amounts to basically a 20% increase in your individual taxes as an individual, as an employee. If you are a small business, it actually drives up your corporate income tax rate by about 30%. So a lot of small employers work with their employees. The thing that I'm really concerned about is a state-administered program. I'm a firm believer, and I think a lot of cases can be made in terms of a private sector can do it better, and government is always not the most efficient administrator of a program like this. They are projecting that it could generate, I think the fiscal analysis started at 63 employees, goes up to 199 employees that will be administering this program. So the premium/tax that the employer and the employees are paying into, first and foremost, are going to go to stand up a whole new state agency. The other issue we have is that the Common Sense Institute has done a fiscal analysis of this and taken a look at, okay, assuming, and this is assuming that 5 or 6% of the state's wage earners at any one time take this leave, then the program, frankly, could be bankrupt within the first year or two. The 0.9% is not going to cover it. And the head of that agency could then arbitrarily raise it to 1.2%. And so employees are paying more, employers are paying more, and it's still, if we have 6 or 7 or 8% of our workforce at any one point in time taking this leave, taking the whole 12 to 16 weeks in a year, the program is not going to have the money to support it. So what happens then? So it is very possible that you would see the legislature have to weigh in some format. We doubt very strongly that they're going to cut benefits. So they're going to either have to go to the voters and ask for an increase in this premium or mandate a premium increase, or they're going to start taking money away from the general fund to help make sure that you get more benefit. And that's where we fund education, that's where we fund transportation and other things. So the reality is, while the proponents say, oh, it's fine, utilization is going to stay low, we'll have the money to do this, the reality is we've got some fiscal analysis that shows that that's just not the case. And the other issue that we have with it is that, again, you're putting it on the ballot, and all of us live in the era of COVID, and we all know that this is an issue that we want to see resolved. But this is a yes or no vote by the citizens. And we, as business organizations across the state, have said, let's get all the stakeholders back together. Let's figure out how to crack this nut and do it in a way that doesn't hurt our economy. I don't know about you guys in Fruita, actually I probably do, but our small businesses right now, 0.9% or 0.45% on all of your employees may not sound like a lot, but it adds up very quickly. And cash is king right now, and we don't know how long this pandemic's going to last. We don't know how long the economic fallout is going to be. Now, they're proposing to start this in 2023 and say by that time we're all going to be fine. I'm glad their crystal ball is that clear because mine is not. And so at the end of the day, when we take a look at this, it's like, okay, employees are going to have to start paying for their medical leave, and employers are going to have to pay. I will say small employers with 10 or less employees don't have to pay the premium, but they have to give the benefit. And so if you're a small employer, and you have to hold that job open for 12 to 16 weeks. So a lot of the small employers I talk to, it's like, now I'm going to have to find a temporary employee to fill that spot for 12 weeks, so it's not just the premium, or I'm going to have to pay overtime to the other people that are there. So from a standpoint of right idea, right concept, we're in total agreement. But the proposal is basically a Cadillac model of benefits with a Subaru payment plan. And it's just not going to work very well. So we're urging a no vote, and as are many others across the state. And again, we're urging no on this proposition. We believe that we should give our employees leave. We believe in families coming together and taking care of each other. But this proposal is the wrong proposal. So that's basically it in terms of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, sir.
The bill for this is essentially paid for by employers and employees, but apparently anyone from a child, infant, or even a retired person can ask for that leave.
Actually, no. It is the leave. You have to be an employee, so you have to be paying into the fund in order to take advantage of it. So the other issue we have is local governments and school districts are not required to participate in this because of some other issues with regard to unfunded mandates that the state cannot put on them. So it's not going to cover everybody. It's only going to cover employees. But the other thing is what you can take the leave for. And this is the other thing that is somewhat concerning to us because it's very broad. It's not just your immediate family. It's not, you can take this leave for anyone that you have a bond with that is a family-like bond. So if you are really close to your next door neighbor, you consider her or a sister, you can take this leave and be paid. Which is why we think they're underestimating the utilization rates. Human nature being what it is, it's like, if I'm paying for this, I'm going to take advantage of this, as they should. And that's why it's got the potential for going bankrupt very quickly under the scenario that's been presented. Now, the one other thing I will bring up, because you'll hear it in the the proponents advertising, which, by the way, is most of the advertising dollars and the dollars to get what's on the ballot came from outside of Colorado, and we think it's important you know that. But they're going to say, well, only 1 in 5 workers gets family medical leave. And you will hear the emotional story of, I know of mothers that had to go back to work 2 weeks after their babies were born in order to have, and they quote a statistic from the Bureau of Labor Standards or something, but they quote a federal, they actually quote a federal source. And the problem with that is that many employers, the Grand Junction Chamber included, now we don't call our leave medical leave. You don't get medical leave and then you get vacation time. We combined it all and said, this is how much leave you can accumulate. You can accumulate up to 6 weeks, and you can use it for whatever you want. Under this scenario, then I would probably have to walk back and actually take benefits away in order to be able to comply with this as well. So we've got some real issues with that. that they do say, proponents, that you can opt out if you offer the same plan. So that means you have to offer 12 to 16 weeks, and you have to give the same sort of leeway on when you can take that leave and who you can take the leave for, which even the largest employers in the state, frankly, are not doing right now. So, anything else? Okay, awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. All right, next we have Commissioner Rose Pugliese, and we're going to put her up on the screen here. She can join us via Zoom to make her presentation. So again, she's going to be discussing the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, in which the Fruita Area Chamber of Commerce took a position on, and they voted to oppose this bill coming up. Bear with us while we get her on the screen.
That's okay, you can leave that sign up.
You don't mind that, huh?
It doesn't bother me.
Oh, she's itty bitty.
There she is.
Rose, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What we'll do is put this here.
Okay.
Uh-oh. It's lost.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Is she frozen?
Rose, are you still there?
Can you hear us,
I'm
Rose?
still here. Yep, I can.
I don't know if we can get that close enough to get down there.
No. We're working with your picture, Rose.
Sorry about that.
Oh, there we go.
It's okay.
Okay. So you can go ahead, Rose.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to present tonight on our opposition to 113, the National Popular Vote Compact. So during the 2019 legislative session, if we all remember, especially in government affairs, there were so many different bills coming at us. We had the red flag bill, the sex education bill, and the anti-oil and gas bill. And so I was working on all different types of legislation, but the National Popular Vote was going through the legislature kind of under the radar. And one day I'm walking to lunch and down Main Street in Grand Junction, and literally 5 people stopped me on my way to lunch that day and said, Rose, what are you going to do to stop the National Popular Vote? And really, it wasn't on my radar, and I didn't know what I could do. So I talked to some friends in Denver and found out that Mayor Don Wilson of Monument had had a very similar experience. And so we started strategizing on some options for Colorado voters to get engaged on this issue. So what we decided to do was go through a process that was a referendum process that would refer this issue to the ballot if we were able to get enough signatures. And this referendum process, we're so fortunate to live in Colorado where our Constitution actually allows a citizen veto of the ability to repeal a law that we don't think is in Colorado's best interest. And so we used that provision, which was not generally well known and hadn't been used since the 1930s, to put this question to the vote of the people. And so we started mobilizing, and I'll be honest with you, when we started, I kind of thought this might be a rural-urban divide issue. And the governor signed the bill into the law, basically giving our 9 electoral college votes for president to this compact of states. He did it on a Friday afternoon, no fanfare, and we hit the ground running with our petitions. And literally our first event was in Grand Junction on that Tuesday. And I've done petition drives before. I had set up, we were supposed to do an event at 3:30. I had a couple of pens. I didn't even have any volunteers. And literally I got to Citrola's at 3:20 for this 3:30 event. And the line of people that wanted to sign this petition were wrapped around the building. And I knew right then and there we would run out of petitions because we had just printed a few. And when I say a few, it was like 500. And it wasn't anticipating we were going to have 500 people, but we had more than that. But what was great about this story is, we ran out of petitions in the first 45 minutes, but people were asking, well, when is your next event? And so I said, well, I guess we'll do 2 events on Saturday. And I organized that really quickly and asked people to come back, right? All these people, we turned away over 100 people. So I said, please come back on Saturday. But you never know if people are going to really come back. Well, not only did they come back on Saturday, but they brought their friends and neighbors. And so we ran out of petitions again on Saturday. But this didn't just happen in Grand Junction. It happened all across Colorado. We had lines of people in Boulder, as we did in Durango, Pueblo, all throughout the state. And what we realized was this really wasn't a rural-urban issue. It was a people of Colorado issue, and people's votes are personal to them, and they felt like they got stolen by the legislature, and they wanted to take it back. And then remember, this was a very highly charged legislative session, and people wanted to do something. They wanted their voice to be heard. And so they helped us through this petition process. We had over 2,200 grassroots volunteers in what would turn out to be one of the largest bipartisan movements to put a question on the ballot in Colorado's history, which we never anticipated when we started. So we go throughout the state. We needed just under 125,000 signatures to make the ballot. We got over 228,000 signatures. I mean, record numbers. And so obviously people were really engaged in this issue. And so now it's on the ballot, and we are working on our education campaign. The grassroots got us on the ballot, and we believe the grassroots will help us to make it over. But there's probably a lot of questions as to, well, why do we oppose the national popular vote? Well, basically, what it does is give away Colorado's voice and vote, and it gives it to large population centers. So basically, whoever wins the national popular vote would get Colorado's non-electoral college votes. And my opponents, when I've been doing debates all week, my opponents talk about fairness. We want one vote per person. Every vote should count. Well, I believe my vote counts. I vote in every election. I engage other people to vote in elections. And I would much rather have Coloradans in control of our electoral college votes than high population centers like California and New York. And so, people say, well, Rose, you keep using California and New York like they're the boogeyman. They're not the boogeyman, but they have a lot more people than we do in Colorado. Colorado's population amounts to 1.8% of the entire nation. So we were going to have a little bit of, if any, influence. The other problem is right now, we're a swing state. And so people will say, well, Rose, Colorado is blue, we may not be a swing state. I'm not ready to give up on Colorado yet, so I'm not quite there, and we're not a swing state. But we have been able to attract presidential candidates on both the Democratic and Republican side to places like Grand Junction, so not just the Metro Denver areas, but all across the state. And so we are able to influence public policy on a national level on transportation and infrastructure and water. And I'll talk to you about water in a second as well, because I do have a concern. Regardless that people say this isn't possible, I believe it is. And so when we talk about protecting Colorado's water, imagine, we're always in droughts. There's low water levels in Lake Powell. We're always talking about how we are going to, get the water that we need. Well, California has always wanted more of Colorado's water, and we have interstate compacts in place. But I argue, and I truly believe this, that if California controls the president, because they're the higher population centers, and that is who the presidential candidates are going to court for votes, then who is going to protect Colorado's water? And is it possible that potentially some of these interstate compacts could get opened up? And so it is a reality, and especially in drought years, which we have seen over the last few years. So we want to ensure that Colorado is still a strong voice and that we keep our votes in Colorado with Coloradans. We are in the best position to tell other Coloradans how to vote. And I was saying to somebody the other day, you know, it might not be that the winner of the popular vote in Colorado, which gets all of our electoral college votes right now, that might not be my candidate, but I trust my fellow Coloradans to make that decision, and not other states like California and New York who don't share our interests or beliefs. And so I think it's really important that we keep our votes here with Coloradans. We have the popular vote. And the other thing the opponents talk a lot about is fairness. Well, we want to be fair. Well, the problem is that every state differs in how candidates make the ballot. And so what I am concerned about is there could be a candidate that actually is on, let's say, a ballot in California that is not on Colorado's ballot, but that candidate could get all of Colorado's 9 electoral college votes, and they weren't even on our ballot. We never got to vet them. We never got to decide if this is who would protect the best interests of Colorado. And so, you know, there's this assumption that, well, these candidates will campaign in each state and in each county. Well, that is just not a reality. Anybody who has worked on a campaign knows you go to the population centers. And we have seen that in Western Colorado year after year, or cycle after cycle, as gubernatorial candidates and senatorial candidates choose not to come to an event like Club 20 debates to talk to rural Colorado. Well, now exasperate that to a national level. Why would they come to Colorado with 1.8% of the population? They're going to go to the higher vote centers. That is just the reality. And so we want to make sure we preserve Colorado's voice and vote. We're asking for a no vote. I know a lot of people complain to me about the language. Because this was a referendum, we had no control over the language. It is the language that the Constitution dictates. So we're asking you to vote no. We do not want to join the compact. And we want to keep Colorado's 9 electoral college votes in Colorado with Coloradans. It is really that simple. Whoever wins Colorado's popular vote should get our 9 electoral college votes. And we should not be part of this compact of states. And from a business perspective, since this is the chamber, think about California and New York. They are high tax centers, not very business friendly, and they could potentially be controlling the president and national policy. And so we would rather keep Coloradans in control. So no on 113, please visit our website for more information, protectcoloradosvote.org. Thank you.
Any questions?
Rose, this is John Rodwick from Fruita. Good afternoon.
Hey, John.
It's my understanding then that by voting no, we essentially negate the legislation that was passed by the Colorado legislature and signed by the governor. That's correct?
Yes, that is true.
And so we're actually taking a different course than what the legislature mandated.
Yes, so the legislature gave, or tried to give, our 9 electoral college votes to the compact of states. Because of our referendum process, we were able to halt our votes from leaving Colorado and will not be affected in this election year. In reality, the compact needs to get to 270 electoral college votes to get into place anyway, and they're not quite there yet. They're just at about 198 without Colorado's votes. So Colorado's votes are currently in Colorado still with the people, and then we'll get to decide whether we join the compact and our electoral college votes go to the compact, or we keep the current process. And so a no vote would keep our current process of all of our 9 electoral college votes going to the winner of the popular vote in Colorado.
And you are pretty well convinced that cities like Boulder, Denver, Pueblo, and other Democratic strongholds will support this, and we will be able to win this particular issue?
Well, we've had a lot of bipartisan opposition. Even in the legislature, it had bipartisan opposition. And so we have seen an overwhelming number of support. And even, the other side has millions of dollars coming from outside the state of Colorado. This is not a Colorado effort by the other side. So we're feeling really confident. Obviously, we would love to be able to do more in terms of education, especially on TV, but it's very expensive and we don't quite have those types of funds. So we're really relying on chambers of commerce. Thank you, Fruita Chamber, and the Grand Junction Chamber. We have chambers from all across the state. We have 31 county boards of commissioners who have taken opposition votes on this ballot measure. So they're helping to educate. So we're really relying on the grassroots to educate people and get us over the finish line.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks, John.
Any other questions? Okay. Great, thank you very much, Rose. We appreciate you taking the time. All right. Our final speaker tonight is going to be Mesa County Assessor Ken Brownlee. He's going to help us better understand Amendment B, the repeal of Gallagher.
I get the easy one. And for the PowerPoint, Kayla, there's, I had truncated this down from a larger one, so about the first half dozen or so slides there are what's significant. And let me start off saying that with Gallagher, are we on? Or not yet? Yeah, the PowerPoint. No, okay, that's me. Mesa County Assessor. I was first elected in 2014. I was a real estate appraiser for about 10 years before that, and I usually tell folks this is my Gallagher, the lobbyist for the Assessor Association a couple of years ago, said I could ring your doorbell, stand on your front stoop, talk to you for about 20 seconds on Tabor, and you got the gist of what it's all about. With Gallagher, I'm talking for 45 minutes, your eyes have glazed over, and we haven't got there yet. So we're going to see how we can get this done in just a few minutes. Go ahead and give it the next slide. When Gallagher was first passed, and Gallagher was essentially an assessment reform amendment from 1982. And when Gallagher was first passed, for a value, we have ad valorem property tax in Colorado, for a value at which a homeowner would pay $1, a non-residential taxpayer would pay $1.38. Today, that non-residential taxpayer pays over $4 for the same value in which a homeowner pays $1. If this fails, it'll be about $5. If it actually goes to 5.88%, which is possible, that's $4.93. Go ahead and give me the next slide. Gallagher does not keep your taxes from increasing. Tabor does. Okay? What Gallagher does very effectively is transfer the burden of property taxes from the homeowner to the non-residential taxpayer. And the reason I specifically say non-residential taxpayer, because in order to get a residential tax rate in Colorado, your property has to have an improvement that is designed and used as a residence. Vacant lot in the middle of a subdivision is non-residential. It's taxed at 29%. Residential is taxed at 7.15%. Okay. The function of the assessor is to discover, list, classify, and assess all the taxable property in the county. And we do that. I'll talk just a little bit about how property taxes are figured so we can explain why Gallagher is bad. Okay. Next slide. Property taxes are ad valorem according to value. So what the assessor does on a biennial basis every 2 years, we try to figure out what is the actual value of the property with an exception. And that's ag. Ag is figured as a hypothetical based on what the land would produce by soil classification. That's also a good time to mention when I say non-residential goes up 4 times as much as residential with Gallagher, and maybe 5, that includes ag. Ag would increase as well. Ag increases on a different rate because the actual value is figured differently. And let's not get too wrapped around the actual value. Okay, what happens is you get the actual value of the property times the assessment rate. And that's really significant. That's the crux of Gallagher, which right now is 7.15%. So when you multiply those two together, you get the assessed value times the mill levy. Mill levy is established by all the different districts in the county, the school districts, the fire district, the library district, the mosquito control district. My personal favorite, the Grand Valley Training District. Let's go to the next one. That's the way you get to taxes. Now then, right now, the residential assessment rate is 7.15%. If this doesn't pass, it could go to 5.88%. The non-residential is 29. Oil and gas, by the way, is 87.5 or 12 times. 12 times the residential assessment rate. When Gallagher was first passed, again, we'll hit the next slide. Gallagher did a lot of good things. It exempted certain personal property. So your residential personal property, all the stuff you have in your house, the nice big screen TV, et cetera, that was taxable. Residential personal property is no longer taxable. It established an annual assessment audit. Every assessor in the state gets audited every year 100%. Reconstituted the State Board of Equalization, which makes sure that similar properties are treated in a similar manner statewide. And one of the big thing, next slide, the big thing it did was it established a relationship between residential and non-residential property with a 55-45 split. And what it did, and what I think was the mistake of what it did, is that is in the aggregate statewide. There is likely no single district in the state that has 45% residential, 55% non-residential in the state. But all across the state, when you add all the non-residential property and all the residential property, the residential assessment rate is the variable to maintain that 45-55 split. And please, before your eyes glaze over, stop me and ask the questions when I say something that you don't follow. That 45-55 split is the target. It's sufficiently complicated. It takes 2 years to get to each change. And we're not going to get too far in the weeds on that because it's complicated. But anyway, what's happened over the years, and once again, when it was first established, 1983, the residential rate was 21%, the non-residential rate was 29%. What has happened, and if you move back right here, this is what's happened with the total value of property in the state. That blue line you have up there is the total residential property in the state, the actual value of all the residential property in the state. And the red line is all other classes. And you can see what that difference is, and sort of to maintain a 45-55 relationship. What's happened is the residential assessment rate has steadily come down over the years in order to maintain that relationship. Now I'll give you the next one. This is one of the proofs that Gallagher doesn't reduce taxes. Taylor does. And you will see the numbers there. That's where it came down. 21 to 18 in 1987 to 16% in 1988 on down. From 07 to 2017, for 10 years there, it would have gone up. The numbers in parentheses represent the 45-55 split. So in Gallagher, the residential rate would have gone up, residential taxes would have gone up in every one of those years. It did not because of Tabor. So we're at a position now. Next slide. Whoop, wrong one. We're done. We're done with the slides. What happens is as that rate goes down, you get to a point. Clifton Fire District is a good example. Just a couple of years ago, they got to a point where the revenue they were getting in for the property taxes couldn't make their operations budget. So what happens? Because of Tabor, you go to the people and you get a mill levy increase. They got a mill levy increase. When they get a mill levy increase, it goes up with the non-residential taxpayers 4 times as high as it does on the residential taxpayers. Because the mill levy is the mill levy. There's not a residential mill levy and a non-residential mill levy. There's only an assessment rate. So there's three variables in that product. So what happens is the more rural and dependent one is on residential assessment rates in order to derive the money that the special districts need to operate, the more you're affected by Gallagher. Denver, for example, with a high amount of commercial property, isn't nearly as affected as Grand Junction or Fruita. When just a couple of years ago, when School District 51 passed the ballot initiative, and they accurately described $9 a month for a median level homeowner. Their median was a little off, but the way they worded it, they were accurate. $108 a year was the increase for a residential taxpayer for that ballot initiative. For a median level business, the taxes went up $1,000. That's what Gallagher does. This is not the best tax policy one could have, but it's a better tax policy than we have now, and it's what's on the ballot. This needs to pass. We need to get rid of that 45-55 split, and that's essentially all this would do, is eliminate that 45-55 split. It puts it back on the legislature, but it takes it out of being a constitutional amendment. Questions? Yes, sir.
As a taxpayer, I saw the phenomena of Gallagher over the past few years, in which, yes, my home taxes or property taxes remained pretty stable. But then the various districts began to create new assessments. We paid increases for educational purposes, fire districts, library, and whatever. And in the final analysis, I came to the conclusion that Gallagher really isn't serving me as a taxpayer the way it should.
Okay, Gallagher doesn't do that. Tabor is what keeps it down. And what happens is when the districts go to a vote of the people, if the vote of the people vote for a mill levy, a mill levy increase or a tax rate increase, it's the vote of the people under Tabor that allows that. Gallagher has no impact on it. But Gallagher doesn't impact the mill levy.
But Gallagher does have an impact upon the business person.
Not through the mill levy. Gallagher has an impact on the business person through the assessment rate.
Right.
Okay, it's a 29 for the businessman or woman. Then the assessment rate is 29% for the homeowner. Right now, the assessment rate is 7.15%. So the difference there is the assessment rate. The mill levy is the mill levy, and the different districts control the mill levy. So the different districts would have to ask for a vote of the people to get a mill levy increase. And if that passes, they get that mill levy increase. Does that make sense?
Not really, but that's okay.
It's a tough one.
Actually, then, by approving this particular ballot, though, it does away with the cumbersomeness of what, the assessment?
What happens, well, the assessment rate.
Yes.
The assessment rate. It does away with that interplay of the 45-55% split between the aggregate residential and non-residential value statewide. So what it would do is it will essentially freeze the assessment rate at 7.15%. Because once again, they can't increase it without a vote of the people because of Taylor. So even, with repealing Gallagher, they still can't increase the rate because that doesn't have anything to do with Gallagher right now because of Taylor. So they couldn't increase it.
Okay.
The legislature, without a vote of the people, and Taylor is a constitutional amendment.
So there's a misconception out there that by repealing Gallagher, our home taxes or property taxes will automatically increase, and that's not correct.
That is not correct. You're right. What will happen if the assessment rate were to drop, then your taxes would go down, and that's possible. And you can also, if this passes, the legislature could lower the assessment rate.
But they can never raise it, right?
They can only raise it with a vote of the people because of Taylor.
And you're recommending that we vote yes?
Recommending that you vote yes.
Thank
Like I
you.
said, this isn't the best tax policy, but it's better than what we have, and it's a step in the right direction.
We had a question come in online. If you have a home business, how does that affect them?
Well, if you have a home business, what happens is the classification is mixed. So let's say, for example, half of your home is your business and half of your home is residential. That will be, half of that will have the higher classification and half of it will have the lower classification. That's the simplest way I can describe that.
Thank you.
Currently, or that's the way it will be.
That is the way it is. That's the way it already is. The difference would be what is that residential rate and what's the relationship if this passes or not, because the residential rate would change. And so in this case, the residential rate would change on half of the home that is the residential, and it would still be 29% on the business portion. So.
Help me understand how to deal with people who are telling me that they will never vote down Tabor, and as a result, they will never want to repeal Gallagher.
You're talking apples and kumquats.
Because they're two different.
They're two different things.
Okay.
Gallagher establishes a relationship between residential and non-residential and attempts to maintain it statewide. The effect of Gallagher is to impact special districts, fire districts, library districts, etc., in rural areas that are more dependent upon residential property tax to fund their operations. Tabor says in order to get a mill levy increase, a tax increase, increased debt, or increased revenue, tax revenue above a certain.
Attention patrons, the facility will be closing in 30 minutes. Again, the facility will be closing in 30 minutes. Thank you.
thought we
Well,
were.
there's your stop.
Yeah, I thought we were under, boy,
Actually,
that's an effective time, that's an effective time slot right there.
So essentially, Gallagher and Tabor are apples and oranges.
Gallagher and Tabor are apples and oranges. They both impact taxes a lot. And the interplay, I talked to a fire station folks here a while back and said, you have a wreck, for example, Orchard Mesa Fire District. You have a wreck at the corner of Gallagher and Tabor. They depend for 93% of their property tax funding on residential funding, residential tax funding. A drop of 7.96 when it went to 7.2%. Well, 7% to 6% is not 1%. 7 to 6 is 1/7. It's 14%. That's a 14% drop in your, because it's 1/7 of your total. And that's what you have to remember there. So that's a significant amount of money. If it were to drop from 715 to 588 in Mesa County, that's $180 million in assessed property value.
So by repealing Gallagher,
Mm-hmm.
we make the tax system more efficient.
By repealing I would argue by repealing Gallagher, I wouldn't say you make the tax issue more efficient because it depends on what the legislature spends it on.
Tell me what the state.
It makes it more fair.
Makes
It makes it more fair. It eliminates the disproportionate increase between residential and non-residential.
Okay, now I've got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
There we go.
Thank you, Ken.
You bet.
Really appreciate it. All right, we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on Zoom and here in person. And if you're not already all politicked out, there is another debate coming up tonight between the vice presidential candidates at 7 o'clock in Salt Lake City. So, like I say, if you're not already burned out from our 3 little ballot initiatives that we went over tonight, you can watch that as well. Again, a big thank you to Commissioner Rose Pugliese, President Diane Schwenke, and County Assessor.